On November 24, 1971, an unassuming man in his mid-40s entered Portland International Airport. Dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, and black tie, he carried a black briefcase and wore a calm, businesslike demeanor. The man approached the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle for $20, identifying himself as Dan Cooper. Nothing about him stood out as unusual, and he boarded Flight 305, a Boeing 727, alongside 35 other passengers. Once on board, Cooper settled into seat 18C near the rear of the aircraft. He ordered a bourbon and soda and quietly smoked a cigarette, blending in seamlessly with the other travelers. The flight took off without incident, and for the first 20 minutes, everything seemed routine. However, the ordinary flight soon took a dramatic turn when Cooper signaled for the attention of flight attendant Florence Schaffner. He handed her a note, which she initially dismissed as a typical flirtatious gesture from a passenger, but Cooper leaned closer and calmly whispered, "Miss, you better take a look at that note. I have a bomb." Startled, Schaffner quickly unfolded the note and read its chilling message. Cooper was hijacking the plane. He demanded $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle to refuel the aircraft upon landing. Schaffner's hands trembled as she glanced at Cooper, who remained calm and polite, his demeanor betraying no hint of malice. To emphasize his point, Cooper opened his briefcase slightly, revealing a tangle of wires, red cylinders, and a battery. The threat was real, and the gravity of the situation began to sink in. Schaffner relayed the message to Captain William Scott in the cockpit. The captain immediately informed air traffic control, and within minutes, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies were notified. The plane continued its flight towards Seattle, but now the stakes were immeasurably higher. The passengers remained unaware of the drama unfolding in the rear of the plane. To avoid panic, the flight crew informed them that there was a minor mechanical issue requiring the plane to circle until it was resolved. On the ground, the FBI and Northwest Orient Airlines worked feverishly to meet Cooper's demands. The $200,000 ransom was quickly gathered from several Seattle banks, and each bill's serial number was carefully recorded. The parachutes Cooper had requested were obtained from a local skydiving school, and every effort was made to ensure that they met his specifications. Cooper's detailed instructions suggested he was no ordinary hijacker. He appeared to have a deep understanding of aviation and possibly a military background. After what seemed like an eternity, Flight 305 finally began its descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Cooper remained composed, showing no signs of nervousness or anxiety as the plane touched down and taxied to a remote section of the runway, far from the main terminal. The atmosphere on board was tense, with everyone wondering how this extraordinary situation would end. As Flight 305 came to a halt on the isolated runway at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the tension inside the aircraft was palpable. Dan Cooper remained calm and composed as he instructed the flight attendants to lower the window shades, preventing anyone outside from seeing inside the plane. On the ground, the FBI and local law enforcement had set up a perimeter, anxiously waiting for the next move in this unprecedented hijacking. The money and parachutes were delivered to the plane as per Cooper's demands. A representative from Northwest Orient Airlines approached the aircraft, carefully carrying a knapsack filled with $200,000 in $20 bills. The serial numbers of each bill had been meticulously recorded in hopes of tracking the money if it were ever spent. Additionally, the 4 parachutes Cooper had requested were brought aboard, 2 primary and 2 reserve, with no tampering or tracking devices that might jeopardize the hostage's safety. Cooper instructed the flight attendant to bring him the money in parachutes. He carefully inspected the contents of the knapsack, ensuring that his demands had been met. Satisfied, Cooper allowed the 36 passengers and 2 flight attendants to disembark, leaving only Captain Scott, First Officer William Ratatsak, Flight Engineer Harold Anderson, and Flight Attendant Tina Mucklow on board. The remaining crew members were instructed to prepare for takeoff once again. Cooper's next set of instructions were highly unusual. He ordered the crew to chart a course for Mexico City, but demanded specific conditions for the flight. The plane was to maintain a low altitude of 10,000 feet, fly at a speed of no more than 200 knots, and keep the landing gear down with the wing flaps set at 15 degrees. Most puzzling of all, Cooper insisted that the plane's rear air stair be lowered in flight, a feature unique to the Boeing 727 that allowed for mid-air egress. These demands strongly suggested that Cooper intended to jump from the plane while it was airborne, a feat that would be both dangerous and daring. Captain Scott expressed concerns about the plane's range given the unusual flight configuration and requested permission to land in Reno, Nevada for refueling. Cooper agreed, demonstrating an understanding of the technical limitations of the aircraft. As the crew prepared for takeoff, Cooper instructed Mucklow to join the others in the cockpit and to remain there with the door closed. The crew complied, leaving Cooper alone in the main cabin. As the plane took off into the night, rain began to fall, and the winds picked up. The conditions outside were harsh, with freezing temperatures and low visibility. Yet Cooper showed no hesitation. Somewhere over the rugged, forested terrain of the Pacific Northwest, between Seattle and Reno, Cooper put on one of the parachutes and secured the knapsack filled with money to his body. He opened the rear air stair and, without a word, stepped into the darkness. The crew in the cockpit felt a slight change in the aircraft's pressure, indicating that the air stair had been lowered. They had no way of knowing exactly when Cooper made his leap, and they continued their flight toward Reno as planned. When the plane eventually landed safely in Reno, the authorities swarmed the aircraft, but Cooper was gone. The bomb, the briefcase, and his clip-on tie were all left behind, but there was no sign of the hijacker or the ransom money. An exhaustive search and investigation were launched immediately. The FBI combed through the suspected drop zone, a vast area of wilderness filled with dense forests, rivers, and rugged terrain. Helicopters and search teams scoured the area for any trace of Cooper, but they found nothing. No parachute, no money, no clothing. Nothing that could definitively prove what had happened to the elusive hijacker. The search efforts continued for weeks, with the FBI interviewing witnesses, tracking leads, and even conducting reenactments to understand how Cooper might have survived the jump. But the more they searched, the more the mystery deepened. Despite their best efforts, the authorities were left with more questions than answers. The investigation into D.B. Cooper's daring escape was one of the most extensive manhunts in U.S. history, yet it seemed destined to end in frustration. For months, the FBI pored over every detail of the hijacking, interviewing witnesses, analyzing evidence, and sifting through potential leads. But as winter turned to spring, the chances of finding Cooper, or his remains, dwindled. The vast and rugged terrain of the Pacific Northwest, with its dense forests, rivers, and mountains, offered countless places where a man could vanish without a trace. The search yielded no physical evidence of Cooper's fate. As time passed, the case took on a life of its own, becoming a cultural phenomenon. The name D.B. Cooper, an alias mistakenly attributed to the hijacker by the press, became synonymous with mystery and intrigue. The case inspired numerous books, documentaries, and films, each offering its own theory on what happened that fateful night. Amateur sleuths and professional investigators alike have spent decades trying to piece together the puzzle, but the truth remains elusive. One of the most significant pieces of evidence to emerge came nearly a decade later, in 1980, when an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram discovered 3 bundles of decaying $20 bills buried in the sand along the Columbia River, about 20 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington. The bills, totaling $5,800, were identified as part of the ransom money given to Cooper. The discovery reignited public interest in the case, but it also raised more questions than it answered. How did the money end up there? Was it evidence that Cooper had perished in the wilderness, or had it been intentionally buried by Cooper himself? Despite the renewed attention, the FBI's investigation remained stymied. Over the years, hundreds of potential suspects were investigated, but none could be definitively linked to the crime. Some theories suggested that Cooper died during the jump, succumbing to the harsh conditions and leaving his body to be lost in the wilderness. Others speculated that he had survived, possibly injured but alive, and managed to evade capture by blending back into society. Among the most compelling suspects was Robert Rackstraw, a Vietnam War veteran and former Army paratrooper with a checkered past. Rackstraw's military background made him a plausible candidate. He had the skills and experience necessary to survive such a daring jump, and his life after the hijacking was marked by a series of criminal activities and legal troubles that only added to the intrigue. Rackstraw was also known to use multiple aliases and had a history of deceptive behavior, further complicating his profile. The FBI initially considered Rackstraw a strong suspect, and his name became widely associated with the D.B. Cooper case in the years that followed. Rackstraw's evasive answers during interviews and his tendency to drop cryptic hints only fueled speculation. However, despite the circumstantial evidence, the FBI was unable to conclusively link him to the hijacking. The case against Rackstraw was largely built on speculation and coincidence, and without concrete proof, the FBI eventually ruled him out as a primary suspect. Rackstraw's life after the hijacking remained shrouded in mystery. He moved frequently, using different identities and staying one step ahead of law enforcement. In the late 1970s, he was arrested for check fraud and other crimes, but he managed to avoid severe punishment by cooperating with authorities. His ability to outmaneuver law enforcement only added to the suspicion that he might have been D.B. Cooper, but the lack of definitive evidence left the case unresolved. In his later years, Rackstraw settled in Southern California, where he lived until his death in 2019. Even in death, he remained a figure of fascination for those obsessed with the D.B. Cooper case. Some believe that Rackstraw had taken the secret of the hijacking to his grave, while others argued that he had merely played along with the rumors to keep the mystery alive. Regardless of the truth, Rackstraw's name would forever be linked to one of the greatest unsolved crimes in American history. The FBI officially closed the D.B. Cooper case in 2016, citing a lack of new evidence and the passage of time. Despite this, the legend of D.B. Cooper remains one of the most enduring in American folklore. He has become a symbol of audacity, defiance, and the ultimate escape artist, a man who thumbed his nose at authority and disappeared into the ether, leaving behind only questions and speculation. The story of D.B. Cooper has inspired countless books, movies, and documentaries, each attempting to solve the mystery or at least explore its many facets. Some portray him as a modern-day Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and vanishing without a trace. Others view him as a cold, calculated criminal who exploited a vulnerable system during a time of growing public discontent. The fascination with D.B. Cooper lies not just in the mystery of his identity, but in the very idea that someone could successfully pull off such a brazen act and get away with it. In an age where nearly every crime is solved with the help of advanced technology and forensic science, the story of D.B. Cooper is a reminder that some mysteries may never be solved. It's a story that taps into the human desire for freedom, adventure, and the thrill of the unknown. What became of D.B. Cooper? Did he land safely, slip into a new life, and spend his stolen fortune in small, untraceable amounts? Or did he meet a grim fate, his body lost to the wilderness and his treasure buried by the elements? These questions may never be answered, and perhaps that's part of the allure. The legend of D.B. Cooper endures because it is unsolved, because it challenges our understanding of the world, and because it leaves room for endless speculation. In the annals of crime, D.B. Cooper stands alone. He was not the first hijacker, nor the last. But he is the only one who pulled off such a brazen act and disappeared without a trace.